Hello everyone. Um, most of students are taking a rest in your house, and today the Korean holiday to celebrate the kids, and uh, we have no class. However, our schedule is a little bit leaving behind, and then to make up the class, I am recording the lecture. I'm so sorry. You need to take a rest, but uh, uh, you should also study. However, the until this coming Wednesday, if you finish watching this video and make a comment, I will accept your attendance. And then, and then, anyway, we so far we have studied the public choice theories, the origin of nationality, and national theories, and then we have studied the different types of market failures, and then from now on, so we need to study the government failures. Before we study government failures, we need to know the characteristics of government to fully understand what the government is, or uh, the component of government, and the characteristics of government services, and then the characteristics of government bureaucrat and organizations. And therefore, to study the characteristics of the government, I prepared the online video. And then, okay, the first, what is the government? As you see in the lecture slide, government is defined as a group of people with authority to govern a country or state, particular ministry in office, right? And then, there are two basic characteristics of government. As you see in the slide, the government is organized to keep order as well as to enhance the total social utilities. How? By using the mandatory what? Yes. What is law? Also, what is tools to govern the country? Tax. We have already studied two tools to govern the countries and peoples, and the law guarantee the stabilities. Also, the taxes is the primary method to maintain the societal orders, by redistributing the resources from the rich to the poor. Also, government play the key roles, crucial roles in remedying the market failures. What kind of market failures exist? We have studied the different types of market failures, such as existing public good, monopoly, externality, transaction costs, and inequalities. And then to fix these market failures, the government intervene in the market by making use of some kind of the policy tools, right? Due to the limitations, time limitations, I will not explain the different policy tools in order to overcome the market failures. Anyway, but overall, the government kind of play very important role in market failures. Okay, and then to understand the government, uh, we need to know the different perspectives about the why government exists, or what the government is. And then there are three different perspectives about governmental functions. The first, mechanical perspective. This means, the like public choice theories, the government kind of need to uh, need to work to uh, moderate the human people who have the self interest. From these perspectives, the human is rational and selfish. Therefore, the primary role of government is to reduce conflict among the individuals who are selfish, who seek their self-interest. Therefore, from this view, from this perspective, a small government is better, because the government cannot change its social systems. The kind of the government kind of the need to play the minimum and small roles in moderating the conflict uh, between the different peoples who are seeking their self-interest. And then, however, there is another perspective. This is Ugonism perspective, and then Ugonism perspective assume that the government is almighty, it's like God, and then the government can solve all of the problems in the world, in the world, in societies. Therefore, the primary role of government is kind of to actively solve the various social problems. And then this perspective lead to the big government, because the government need to solve all problems, and to solve all of problems, social problems, government need to have the sufficient resources. And then the third perspective, government perspective. This means government is one of the organization institutions who are composed of societies, and then governance perspective is aligned with collaborative governance and new governance. And there are different types of institutions, such as market, government, and civil societies and non-profit organizations. They are working for increasing social utilities. Therefore, the government is kind of one of the partners which is solve social problems. Therefore, the primary role of government is kind of to moderate different organizations existing in the world, in societies, kind of the business, citizens, non-profit organizations, medias. There are a lot of institutions and organizations in societies, and then they are working for social utilities. And among these various organizations, government is one of the institutions, and then the government play a crucial role in moderating in harmonizing these the different and various organizations, right? Also, from these perspectives, there have there have been some kind of the historical stages explaining the government roles, and then there are four stages explaining government roles. The first is minimum government, second is welfare and administrative state, and third neoliberalism and classical new public management, and then first and new governance. This is kind of the historical stages from 19th to the current age, right? Maybe the first stage is minimum. The first stage is minimum government. This is these stages are from 19th to 90s, 1930 or 1940. And as we studied in the free markets, Adam Smith emphasized the minimum government because scholars, people believe in the power of market. By means of the voluntary exchange in the market, and the markets can produce the resources in the most efficient ways. Why? Because of what kind of hand? Invisible hand. In the markets, people make the voluntary transactions to maximize their self-interest. The Adam Smiths call these invisible mechanisms invisible hand, right? Therefore, in the free markets, the government don't need to play the big role in controlling market. The government don't need to make small roles. Therefore, the government don't need to have big roles, big powers, the high level of resources. Just kind of the keeping, just kind of the government need to keep the market order by providing some kind of polishing services and defense services, because the external threat may destroy the market transactions. Just kind of government to protect the market. And then how? Kind of creating rules and institutions to protect the private right or assets to maintain the market. But this, the belief that the government need to play a minimum role in just maintaining the market, this belief was broken. Why? Because of a lot of market failures. When kind of market failures happened a lot, the Great Depressions in 1930s, in 1932, the Black Monday, the stock market, the value of stocks plummeted by 80%, decreased by 80% because of market failures. Government government played the minimum role in moderating the market, and then the amount of market failures increase, and then suddenly the market collapsed in 1932, and we call it the Great Depressions. And so many people lost their jobs, and the unemployment rate increased a lot, and the economy declined drastically because the market collapsed. And how can government overcome this market collapse? At the time there are two paths. The United States and the German or Japan. The United States, tried to overcome the market collapse, Great Depressions, by investing public infrastructures, right? This was very famous, the public infrastructure construction project called as Tennessee River Construction Project. We call it the New Deal. The Keynes argued that to overcome the market failures, market collapse, the government must play very big role in increasing the public investment. Through increased public investment, government can hire unemployed people, and unemployed people could work in the public construction project, and then at any rate because they were hired, and then they received wages, incomes, and buy some kind of private good, and the economy revived. Business could sell their product, and then kind of the economy was restored. But also the government need to make some kind of social policies, because of the Great Depressions. Many people lost their jobs, and they became poor. The poor people did not have enough money, and then just kind of in this case, to rescue the poor people, government to implement social welfare programs. And then under the social welfare programs, the poor people could survive. And then the poor people overcame the problems from the Great Depression, right? But in contrast with the United States, which increased the public investment and social welfare programs, the Germans and the Japans tried to overcome the Great Depressions by how? By invading other countries, imperial regions. the Germans, invaded France, the Russia, and England. Also, Japan invaded China, Korea, and the southern Asian countries such as the Cambodia, Vietnam, the Philippines, and however they failed because the Japan and Germans uh, 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 German and Japan thought to implement the military policy. At any rate, to overcome the great differences, the government needed to make the public construction project and design social welfare programs. In this case, inevitably the role of government became bigger and bigger, right? And then inevitably the government became big government. We call it the welfare or administrative status, because the government increased their roles and resources and powers, right? Therefore, the welfare or administrative from 1940 1970s, right? And the United States, as I said, implemented New Deal policies and new social programs under the Great Society movement. Also in Europe, maybe the northern European countries such as Sweden, Norway, the Finland, and Denmark, they implemented a lot of social welfare programs under the principle of social democracy. So we call it from the cradle to the grave. The government guaranteed the entire people's lives, and under the welfare state and social welfare state, the government needed a lot of financial resources, but the crisis happened because of the big role of government. In 1970s, because the government became big and the efficiency of government services increased a lot because of the side effect of the big government. And the government increased their spendings and expenditures to cover social welfare programs and public investment projects. However, in 1970s there was oil crisis because of the conflict between Israel and Arabic countries, and then the price of oil skyrocketed, increased a lot, and then the profit of business decreased a lot because of the economic decline in 1970s. The amount of revenue also decreased a lot, right? Because government taxations and revenues was based upon the economic activities, economic prosperities, and then because of decrease tax, the government could not maintain the big government, right? Therefore, the government reform was required in 1970s because of increased expenditures, also because of decreased tax, decreased revenues. And then 1980s, the two very popular and famous leaders in England and USA, Donald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, they wanted to overcome this kind of problem of big government. How? By introducing new liberalisms, 신자유주의 in Koreans. Two leaders tried to reduce the size of government. How? By prioritizing the government services or institutions, organizations. Under the Margaret Thatcher leadership, the big public enterprise was prioritized. Public railway enterprise was privatized into private organizations. Also, the Donald Reagan fired a lot of the public workers, like the Elon Musk under the Trump administrations. Kind of the big government, very inefficient, and then try to size of the government to overcome the decrease revenue, increase expenditures. Also, in 1980s, the new liberalism, under the new liberalisms, the size of government decreased. Also, in 1990s, so similarly, the new public management was popular. This means, under the new public management, the government organizations very actively adopted the principles of market. Therefore, we call it the market-oriented reforms. Under the new public management, some kind of the market systems was introduced to operate government. People performance, contracting out, deregulations, and the horizontal organizations and decentralizations. This kind of the reforms were implemented under the new public management. Anyway, this is a new trend of government because the reform the big government which was adopted to overcome the Great Depressions. However, the big government could not be operated because of decreased revenues, and then new reforms were implemented. However, think about the problem of new reforms, new liberalisms, market-oriented reforms. What kind of problems happen? Government organization is not private organizations, right? A lot of side effects were generated under market-oriented reforms, right? It's because of the measure. It's very difficult to measure the performance. Also, the government services are provided in the monopolized ways. There is no competitor, no competitions. Because of no competitions, how can we encourage public officials to compete to improve the quality of public services? There are a lot of side because of these limitations. There are a lot of there were a lot of problems, and then the new roles of government emerged. We call it the new governance. From the governance perspective, and then the government kind of just one of the institutions and organizations which are composed of societies. Then the various of institutions such as a company, citizens, interest groups, medias, and non-government organizations need to cooperate to produce and provide public services which contributed to social utilities and social problems. And then we call it the collaborative governance, collaborative network. And then under the new governance, there are a lot of social cooperative organization or social collaborative governance emerged. The public-private partnerships, joint ventures, citizen participations. This is typical systems to encourage new governance, right? And then the government is kind of the only institutions who which produce and provide public services. Different institutions, different organizations, could produce public services by collaborating, by cooperation under the new governance. Okay, this is history of government. And next, we need to understand the component of government. What kind of the branches? What kind of branches of government exist? As you know, there are three branches: executive, legislature, judicial systems, right? In the executives, the president or prime minister is responsible for. They are responsible for executives. Also, the legislatures. This is kind of the primary role of legislatures is to make the law, right? By maintaining societies, the legislators make creative the law. What about the role of judicial systems? They judge the law and kind of policies by interpreting, by making the rules of the law and order, administrative orders. And then these kind of three branches are operated under the principle of check and balance. They need to balance, right? And also, even though there are three branches, the the sometimes the power of three branches difference according to the different systems of government, and the democratic government is categorized by where the power is focused on executive, legislatures, and judicial systems. And then there are three types of systems: the presidential systems, and then parliamentary systems, and semi-parliamentary systems. This means, to represent the executive, the president was elected by elections, right? And then the president has the power, strong power, to control executive. Under the parliamentary systems, there is no president. The people could select the legislators to make the legislature systems. And then among the legislators, the prime ministers was selected. Therefore, the legislatures represent the executive, right? And then under the parliamentary systems, there are two parliamentary systems: bicameral and unicameral. The bicamerals, and then two types of legislatures, right? The House and Senate. Unicameral, under the unicameral systems, there is only one legislature. And then also, between the presidential and the parliamentary systems, there is a semi-presidential system or dual executive systems. In this case, the president, both president and prime minister exist. And then in this case, the president is responsible for external policies such as military policy, diplomatic policies, something like that. Also, the prime minister is responsible for internal policies such as economic policy and social policies, right? And then, to operate the government, there are different types of the laws and orders. As you know, so constitutions, the most important and high-level laws. The constitutions overall codify the overall governing rules, right? And then also, law is kind of the general rules specified by the content of constitutions, to operate the government policies. The law should be created under the content of the constitutions. Also, under the rules, the administrative orders should be specified. The administrative order was created to specify the content of rules, right? And then, based upon the administrative orders, the planning, policy, and programs were created and implemented, right? And then the constitution and rules are controlled by democratic elections, right? To make the constitution and laws, or to change the constitution and laws, the legislators need to make the voting, right? However, administrative order and planning policy and programs, and they could the president and the ministers can create the administrative orders without the legislators votings, right? Because of this is a kind of the low level of rules, right? These are the low the low level of rules, right? Also, let us study the characteristics of the government services, right? There are typical characteristics of the government services. The first characteristics is monopolistic productions, right? The government services provide public goods such as police, defense, and natural services. In this case, the private companies. Do you think the private companies can provide and produce the public good? No. Only government produce this kind of public services. Therefore, naturally, the public services is a monopoly, right? Because of no competitors. However, under the new public management or under the new liberal regimes, particular services were privatized and contracted to business in the private sectors. Driving license, higher education, automobile inspections. In the past, and the government provided these services in the monopolistic ways. However, in Korea and I don't know other countries' cases, but the private companies issued driving licenses where there are a lot of the high education. So Dongguk University was kind of a private university. Also many types of the private high education, even in middle educations, right? What is the market test? Market test means this kind of public services. Market test determine whether public services could be prioritized, could be contracted to private companies, right? If the particular services pass the market test, these services could be privatized, contracted out. Also, another characteristics of the public services, isolations between cost and revenues, right? Think about the private company. In the private companies, the production cost is highly connected, aligned with the revenues. How? If the production costs decrease, revenue increase a lot. Therefore, in the case of private companies are incentivized to reduce production cost. Why? To maximize profit and revenues. What about public services? The public officials, public organization, government, is not incentivized to cost, because automatically the government could increase the taxations, right? Therefore, completely in government services, the cost and revenues are disconnected, right? The cost kind of expenditures and spendings, they are not incentivized to reduce expenditures and cost, because even though the government increase the cost expenditures, the government could increase the taxations, because two systems, cost, the both cost and revenues are fully disconnected, right? And then this kind of isolations inevitably lead to inefficiency, because government are not motivated to make it efficient. Also, it's very difficult to measure the performance of government services, right? How can we measure the performance of government services? In contrast, what about private organization? How can we measure the performance of private organization? Yeah, right. Profit. However, government, public services, public good, very difficult, right? No way to measure government services. Also, the last characteristics of government tools, lack of closed systems. Private goods are eliminated when the no profit is produced, and when the people don't like the private goods. However, it's extremely difficult to stop the public goods, even though they are not efficient, even though they make the performance, right? Why? Just kind of the public services, public goods, because public goods are connected to politics. If public services, public goods were implemented, and then there are policy or public service target groups, and then if this kind of the citizens public target groups lose their benefit from the public services, this is very problematic politically. Why? The citizens target groups complained of this kind of closed public services, and then the politicians are very sensitive to this complaint, and then even though the public services, public good are not effective, efficient, politicians try to maintain the public services because of politics, because of the elections. In the next elections, the citizens will not support the politicians who eliminated public services or goods. This is why the public services are not eliminated. right? But of course, there are some kind of systems to eliminate public services, zero-based budgeting, sunset law. This mean if the public services is not efficient, the budgeting, no budget, zero budget. Also, sunset rules, the after 5 years, 10 years, after the particular period, the automatically public services closed according to the sunset law. Okay, and then okay. That is, this coming Wednesday, let's study the characteristics of government bureaucrat. It's very difficult to concentrate on the online lectures, and then I will close the online lectures. And this coming Wednesdays, we'll review what we have learned in the online classes, and the next class, we will study the government bureaucrat, the characteristics of government bureaucrat, and then also characteristics of government organizations, and then difference between public and private organizations, and some kind of the principles of government reforms, which implemented under the market-oriented reforms. Okay, thank you very much, and enjoy the holiday. And however, until this coming until the next class on this coming Wednesday, you need to watch the video and then make a comment by including your names, and then I will admit your attendance if I identify your names until the next class on this coming Wednesday. Okay, thank you very much. See you next class. Bye bye.